You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work.
Ted, what you're doing is irresponsible. This club actually means something to this town.
I know that. I do. Trent, what do you love? Is it writing?
Yes.
Yeah, well, good, because you're darn good at it.
Thank you.
Welcome. Me? I love coaching. Now, I'm going to say this again, just so you didn't think it was a mistake the first time I said it. For me, success is not about the wins and losses. It's about helping these young fellas be the best versions of themselves on and off the field. And it ain't always easy, Trent, but neither is growing up without someone believing in you. Let me ask you this. Is my tongue still in my mouth? Because I am about to hallucinate from all the heat here.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Signal Watch. This is a very special edition of the Signal Watch. It is the Ted Lasso Roundup for the end of Season 2 here in 2021, and we have a multitude of guests today. Let's start with Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael.
That's
I like
excellent.
Ted Lasso.
Great. Then that's your qualification. All right. Laura, you haven't been on since Tiger King, I don't think.
Yeah, I took a big pandemic break after Tiger King. Who knew?
Tiger King was a show that occurred 20 years ago in 2020.
But I'm Laura Maxwell Scott, and I'm back.
Excellent.
Ted
I'm
Lasso.
so happy to have you back. I'm glad Ted got you to believe and come back. Marshall.
Hi, my name is Marshall, and I have a dad with whom I have a complicated relationship.
Which makes you deeply qualified for this podcast and this show. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and we've all been watching Ted Lasso. We kind of are on a little social Slack that we talk to each other on throughout the week. And Ted Lasso has come up a number of times, and eventually we're like, well, we're on the podcast. We might as well do an episode. So one of the things that's really interested me about the show, kind of at the beginning of the second season in particular, is kind of how people have been watching the show and kind of accessing the show. And one of the things we're kind of getting into more and more through the canon episodes of Signal Watch is kind of what's people's motivation, kind of what makes them really interested in something. And one of the things I found fascinating, let me flash back to when I was watching Mad Men. When I was watching Mad Men, I followed a little bit of the social media around it. And I remember specifically there was a character named Bob who came on. And I remember people talking about how they thought Bob was a spy, either from the CIA or from the KGB, out to get Don Draper. And it was the craziest thing I think I'd ever seen. But it made me think so much about how people watch shows with certain expectations of how things are going to work. And one of the things that Ted Lasso has done is I hesitate to use the word subvert expectations, but it's challenged expectations of kind of what people kind of thought this thing was going to be. I didn't watch the first season while it was airing. I watched it in about 3 weeks, about 3 weeks before the second season started. I blasted through it, and then I immediately watched it again before the second season started because it's very easy digestible, small chunks. And so it was really interesting when the second season started to me, how people kind of came at it and were like, what is this? Where's my funny, ha, coach who makes me laugh because he doesn't know how to drink tea. And that was very much how people had kind of somehow passed through the entire first season, and that was their takeaway. So I'm a little curious as to kind of starting maybe with Michael, kind of what was the thing that kind of drew you into the show and made you interested in it?
Thanks, Ryan. I was aware of the show. I want to say I'm not entirely certain. I imagine the whole first season was kind of done before we got into it. And part of that is by design on my part. When there's a new thing to watch, there's so many new things to watch, and especially if it's a series, you kind of have to, at this point, earn my interest to get me to come back every week. I'm not totally averse to the weekly drop, but if I don't know what it is, you need to give me like 4 or 5 of them at least to make up my mind, especially for a show that has a shorter runtime, I think, like that Ted Lasso does. But we watched it. We liked it immediately. I tend to try to be a positive person. There's a lot of things about his attitude and the general vibe of that show that I gravitated towards, almost immediately. So we kind of gobbled through it, but I don't think that it had really reached memification status when we watched it. At least not in my timelines. And so we watched it, but I also don't feel like the wait between season 1 and season 2 was as eternal. So I'm unsure when exactly we dived in, but we watched it. I know I've seen season 1 twice because it was an easy thing to consume on a weekend when I didn't have anything else to do and that sort of thing. But season 2 we watched, it had earned it. And so we watch it every week as we get it. And so because of our schedule around here, I don't usually get to watch it until Sunday night. So there is a bit of concern, that a show that drops on, does it drop on Thursdays or Fridays? I don't know, but
it drops on Friday at midnight Eastern time, because you'll start getting people in California saying things about it on Twitter, like before I've gone to bed.
Gotcha. Well, yeah. I have probably just curated my social media in such a way that it has never been spoiled for me. I don't know that Ted Lasso is a show that, it's not Game of Thrones, it's not like a spoiler. If you find out that this character and that character did something, that's just going to totally wreck your weekend. But that's how we watch it. That's how I came to it.
Okay. And Laura?
Yeah, I think we started watching the first season while it was still airing, but enough that we were far enough behind that we could double up episodes, because I definitely remember doing a few at a time. And then this time, Eric, my husband, and I try to watch it together. We had some time in the middle of this season where like there's travel and stuff. So we weren't necessarily in the same place where it was just like, we're giving up our pact. Go ahead and watch it. Tell me how many episodes you get ahead, then I will catch up. And so we did that, and then watched. So we tried to sort of watch it towards the end at the same time, but not necessarily together, just because of circumstances. But that's sort of how I digested it, I guess, in short.
And Marshall?
Yeah, we were like, I think 3 or 4 episodes had passed, and I think Jordan was like, "Oh, we got to watch Ted Lasso." I think she was hearing a lot about it in her online and real life circles, and I was, I read blogs, I follow the Twitter, so I was aware of it as a show, and that's sort of how if we're early in the season and it's like it's picking up some juice and I have time to watch it, I'm on it. If it's popular, especially if it's a show that like Jordan and I, we always have like sort of one show that we're working on, and this became our show that we both sort of agreed upon. And if I get 3 or 4 seasons behind, I'm never going back. It's not going to happen. And so I jumped on this one, and and the other part about it is it's so short. It's just easy to digest. And so it's a snack in social, it's sort of like in TV terms, it's a light snack. And then you find out it's not. So that's been really the joy for me of Ted Lasso, and then that's sort of the way I came to. And then we were just watching it every weekend. Really, we rarely hit it on Friday when it comes out. I mean, rarely hit it on Saturday. Where it's like, because Sunday evening is usually our thing, and so we've been watching it on Saturday or Sunday. Maybe I'm doing the laundry on Saturday afternoon. That's when we've been hitting it.
And have you looped back and watched it more than once?
I haven't, but Jordan has. I mean, for her, that's like her ASMR. You know, that's like, it's like she'll just put that on at all times of the day, and she's not even watching it. It's just sort of just in the background. I think she's been through it 3 or 4 times at this point in terms of the episodes. And now I know it's just going to be on a loop. She's just going to put it on, and all will be right.
Yeah, it's been an interesting fit kind of in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, I feel like we had kind of Schitt's Creek as the pandemic hit, and it was kind of this show about like, these people have been thrown out of their normal set of circumstances and are now trying to do the best with what they've got in another set of circumstances. And then this show kind of came along of people who are now just kind of dealing with who they are and the circumstances they're in, in a kind of a different way. They're not, in Schitt's Creek was about them like trying to go back to being who they'd been when they were millionaires and all of that. And, that's not necessarily, the same, but both of them were about, kind of finding this kind of kindness with other people, and kind of becoming a better version of themselves through the course of the series. And I find it really interesting that at least some portion of the population, who's not, I guess, watching, Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, and Chicago EMTs or whatever, is watching this kind of stuff. And it does seem to be resonating. And I don't have any idea what the numbers are on either of those, but I assume that they're pretty monster. But was there any particular emotional resonance or anything like that also drew you guys in? And I'll just throw that out to the whole room.
Sure. I'm going to start. Schitt's Creek started before the pandemic, so it was great to sort of finish that up and have something kind during the pandemic. But Ted Lasso is just like a breath of fresh air. And there's certainly been comparisons to like Mr. Rogers and things like that. And I don't think it's exactly the same, but it was certainly nice to have a show that just, there wasn't a big anti-hero. Like, it was a nice, comforting show to watch for the first season. And even in the first season, there are villains, and there are villains that we come to love. But that's sort of what drew me in. It was like everybody said, it was something that was easy to watch maybe a few episodes of. And also it made me laugh. And it also made me feel good.
Yeah, and there's nothing, and I want to say it's fascinating that we feel guilty about that, or think there's something wrong with that. That if it's not Game of Thrones in a wedding that ends in a massacre, that we think that there's somehow like no weight to that.
I don't feel bad about it. And I do think it's weighty. I think that's a good point, because I think it wasn't simple, but it was easy to digest. But I think if you've watched it many times, and I actually haven't watched it many times, I've seen a few episodes more than once, but there's layers, and they had a whole plan out from the beginning. And, it's clear that there's very good writing, and there's clues, and there's things you can catch. And if you watch it more than once, or if you're paying attention, or if you know a certain reference.
I think what it's doing that's different, right, is that for the first time, certainly at this sort of scale and this sort of cultural cachet, appointment TV, prestige TV is a shorter episode thing, smaller arc things, and it is very much about joy and kindness and and humor. There's not some ulterior thing happening. And what we saw across season one, is that there were longer arcs, and there were ulterior motives, and people who had growth that needed to happen. Certainly Ted Lasso is not brought to that team. We don't understand why he's brought to that team when that show starts, and so there are things happening there, but by and large, we've been trained that it's going to take 6 years to find out, what is going to happen with Don Draper, what makes King so-and-so tick on Game of Thrones or whatever. Like, these things are so heavy and they go there, so to speak, when it comes to violence, sex, and so subject matter in general. And Ted Lasso isn't that. And yet masses of people want to watch it. We want to talk about it. We want to treat it the same as these other shows. And so to me, that's what's new. And I don't even know that Apple TV, well, certainly not Apple TV, but I don't know that the Ted Lasso people, were even shooting for that target. I think they were just making a show, and we as audiences have elevated it up. The content is certainly there. The substance is absolutely there, but that's new. And, that's what I think. I think that tuning in to this thing that you better not spoil it. We're all going to watch it, water cooler it on Monday. That's fine. To be happening on a show like Ted Lasso that handles issues the way it does with taking the high road on things and having that actually be impactful on the people that he deals with. To me, that's new. It's like no one has really tried that tone yet when they are getting the kind of money and exposure that a show like that does.
I think what is so awesome about Ted Lasso is it is a mix of stuff that we haven't seen, but it's on top of something that's really, really familiar. This is Bad News Bears, Fish Out of Water, Cheers. I mean, that's really what you're talking about. It's like those three elements are the sort of very Lego-y building blocks that we're talking about. Is, here or Major Leagues.
It's literally the plot of Major League. Yeah.
It's literally the plot of Major Leagues, but it's got this fish out of water element to it as well. And then one of the things I like is that it throws one of the pleasures that you get out of this show, and some of the weight that comes throughout the show, is that you also have the Cheers vibe, where there's social stratification, economic stratification, where they're pulling those people together inside of a world where you wouldn't normally expect them. And that's generating a lot of pleasure out of that. Out of the idea that, Ted Lasso's hanging out in this neighborhood bar and getting to know the locals there. And Ted Lasso is coming up to meet the boss every day and really becoming friends with that person. And the executives and the team, they're hanging out. They're not at war with one another. And so there's this element of that they're pulling people together in a way that you really kind of see. It's very sitcom-y in that way, but it doesn't feel like a sitcom. And I find that it's the mixture of what Michael said, where there's some they're doing new stuff, but they're bringing you in with, they got very familiar tricks. They're sort of the setup is
they're using tropes that are very comforting and familiar to feed us some new information. And they know that they're using these tropes. It's very clear. Yep. And and that's part of the pleasure too, is the Easter eggs, which we'll talk, I'm sure we're going to hit later, but where there's even to the point of shorthanding some of these relationships with the way characters are named and the way arcs are structured to call back to tell. It's a show that's very much in love with television. And you sort of get into that. You can sort of go deeper into it if you want, but everybody, like we showed the first 2 episodes to my dad. Like, this show is just obviously enjoyable from the word go. And I think a lot of that depends on the way that it's a fish out. It's a familiar fish out of water story. And then the fish is Jason Sudeikis. There's like, I don't know how you're going to find somebody more like pleasant to center a show around and more non-threatening to center a show around in terms of like, here's a funny white guy with a mustache, but then they lure you in with that
and what you get is a lot more than what you're initially bargaining for.
Yeah, one of the things that, to get into one of the characters and kind of a angle through which, a lot of that was starting to expose itself, of how smart they were being about all this stuff. Yeah, I watched the first episode and I was like, this is really charming, but this is Major League. And I have seen Major League at least 10 times. But then I talked to Laura, and I think you guys were on the chain with us too on that, a bit about like, oh my God, who is this woman who we've never seen before, Hannah Waddingham, of, she's so damn good on the show that despite the fact she's playing who, the actress in Major League is perfectly fine. She's the aunt from Secret of My Success, and not Hannah Waddingham. That's just the same actress in the two 80s movies. But the arc that she goes through, where you can kind of see these different things going on with her, and she can't say any of it. And so it was kind of like all on her face of what's going on. But in the middle of her trying to blow up this organization, she's also dealing with, singing Let It Go with her team, and then dealing with her coach / maybe he's a friend who's, having this panic attack on the street. I've never seen anything like that in a sitcom. And if it was going to happen in a usual hour-long drama, it would have been treated as tonight, Coach Lasso is going to have a crisis.
Very
special episode.
Yeah, we're going to talk about anxiety. It's going to be a thing we do for 30 minutes. So yeah, I mean, it was really fascinating to kind of start to see these, extra layers of depth they were willing to give, because Coach Lasso seems like a cartoon, right? I mean, that was why I wasn't interested in initially watching it. I'd seen some trailers for it and kind of was like, yeah, like Sudeikis, maybe I'll give it a shot at some point. But, it's a fish out of water, being a cartoon American in cartoon England. I don't know how interested I am in that. And that's not what the show is at all when you're 3 episodes in.
Right. I was going to say, very quickly, they sort of introduce that he's having trouble in his marriage and like has left his kid, and it gets deeper quick. Mm-hmm. Even though he is for the first 3 episodes and even much of the first season, much more of a caricature, and you're not a real person that could exist in the world.
They round him out pretty quickly, which I think is, if you're going to give it, I don't remember which episode they actually start to figure that out, but it's not too deep into season 1 when the wife and kid come to visit him, and you realize, that these things are going on too. And his marriage has to necessarily fail for him to go to the places that the show wants to take him. They answer that question, I think, pretty quickly. And they seem to take a longer time with Rebecca's motivations, Jamie's motivations, Roy's motivations. All these other things are much more baked in. And I think that one of the things that you see with season 1 is there are these sort of Hail Marys that are going to be cast about in the first episode or so that you're not really going to get resolution on until later, right? These arcs are happening. And they, I guess if anything sitcom-y about it is that they do button them up in ways that are satisfying, but they don't leave you hanging really with a whole lot of it. I think at the end of the first season, it's just like, oh, what's going to happen to, the football team because they have not succeeded. And then we get into season 2, and those problems are solved a lot quicker. They are solved largely within the episode. The conflict is set up, and then it's kind of solved later. They give you a bit of that because we see that something emotional is happening with Ted, and they bring in Dr. Sharon, and there's some of that, but by and large, just look at the way that season opens with, the guy whose name escapes me right now kicks the ball and he kills the dog.
Danny Rojas.
Yes, Danny Rojas.
Football is life.
Yes, he kills the dog. That guy is fixed by the end of the episode. Right? He's all
no,
dead.
he sort of is, but he's not really fixed until but he's not really fixed till the finale.
Spoiler alert.
No,
there's going to be some spoilers in here.
There are some spoilers.
Absolutely. I think that the last couple episodes of the season do the callbacks in the right way to give them more. But if they had never revisited that, if they had not dealt with that,
I think
it's good writing the way they dealt with it. But had they not done it, we would have just remembered how the season started. You know, like that guy's given a whole problem to justify a character showing up on the show.
Well, the sponsorship is another example of where they sort of like, it starts off like it's going to be this is the kind of thing. And this goes to what Ryan was talking about. They throw in a bunch of mini arcs that are the kind of thing that could in some shows sustain entire seasons. And this show is like, no, we really want to explore character. So we're going to throw a bunch of mini arcs in there, but where they're not going to be sitcom length, where they're contained within one episode, and they're not going to be season length arcs. They're going to be little mini arcs. And I think that's where what Ryan was talking about is so true about the shows, like that and I think some of the backlash we saw on among the sort of, the TV literati were sort of upset with the show, or not even upset, but just like they were, I don't know, perturbed with the show because it was missing the beats that they were expecting. And this show is giving you a different kind of a way to consume these stories with this kind of mini arcs. Oh no, the sponsorship deal is going to be over in 2 episodes. That's going to be done, or in an episode and a half. And then that's going to be resolved, and you'll just see the different sponsor on the show, but there's callbacks to it throughout, later when it's just a really interesting way to deal with character development and you really focus you or redirects you to the characters and their thematic arcs instead of the plot driving everything.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of resonance in this show. I think that's speaking sort of to what you guys said, like I guess at the end, Danny Rojas didn't have to kick, like Jamie doesn't necessarily have to give up his kick to Danny Rojas. And like, we could have gone on without that moment ever happening, but that has so much to do with the character of everyone and tying up all of that. And it's calling back to something that you realized went back to the first episode. And the same with Nate, and the same with like Sam. I think if you're watching those first seasons and you're like, the whole Nigerian story is very, is this too like messagey, but you're realizing it's setting up his relationship with his father. It's setting up who he is as a person, what if the whole thing is about the choices that we make, like it's his choices and how hard it must be to like give up all of that money, in order to stand up for what he believes in, as opposed to other choices other people make. And so, it's setting up so much that they're going to pay off later in the season. But I think we just collectively, a lot of people that I think are very smart, we all sort of lost our patience, or I don't know. I was feeling patient. I was like, let's see where this goes. But I felt like a lot of people who I read and usually agree with were not feeling that way.
So the thing with the Nigerian sponsor, right? The getting rid of the sponsor, there's 1,000 ways to get rid of a sponsor if you've decided that's a thing you need to deal with. But getting rid of it that way does set up sort of a certain level of integrity for Sam. But what it does is it brings in Banter as the actual sponsor, and that is going to drive his relationship for the rest of the season, because that is the mechanism by which he forms this relationship, this mystery relationship that he has, right? So that almost doesn't exist. Certainly it's not prominent in the show, but that's why they all get on this app, and that's going to create the deeper. So we get to, because they did it the way they did it, it sets up how he's going to be with his father, which is obviously an important theme on the show. It's going to enable this relationship that is going to totally dominate the second half of the season for these two characters. And, they didn't have to do it that way, but they certainly did. And I think, to me, that's the sneaky thing, is that rather than make it messagey, as you say, about he's had those moments before where he didn't want the little army man, you know, and he's not sure he can play. And that feels like higher stakes. This isn't an army man. This is, I think that the people who sponsor our team, which obviously sports sponsorships is, I don't know that one player gets to make that call, but it happens in this universe and it kind of goes away pretty quickly. And then,
right. Well, and he says he just doesn't want to be the poster boy. And I think, and he has very kind bosses who are like, yes, we'll take care of that for you. And then when they all do the big protest, which Jamie takes part in, that sort of, I don't know that they buck the sponsor so much as they get dropped. But.
Sure. Right. But you know, that, like when that happens, as to go back to what Marshall said, you know, the major, you know, the chest sponsor is not a part of your show anymore. A part of your team anymore. Like the show could be about that, you know, that could be the thing that drives everyone's motivations for the next 6 or 8 episodes.
Yeah.
And it's totally not. He gets the win. TV lets Sam have the win. We get to feel good about it and feel like, you know, you can change the world with your good vibe. And it also sets up these other situations that end up working out really well.
Sure. And you know, the Keeley at the end of season 2, I mean, her whole launch, I guess, for wherever she's going into season 3 is because of the success she's had with the banter thing and the relationship she's built there. So it's building for her. And the kind of whatever other splinter of it was, Rebecca also got rid of the last of Rupert's influence on the team by getting rid of, it's his friend. That's why Dubai Air was the sponsor. And so there's all these kind of little things. It seems very light. And I think there was some kind of grumbling about, I was expecting there to be something to make me feel really good about how they fought back against Dubai. It's like, well, one, Dubai Air is like a real thing. So they're going to they clearly agreed to not be on the show anymore. I was shocked, frankly, that they were whatever happened with them and being willing to have some villainous part of what they were up to. It surprised me a little bit, but but yeah, I mean, it was really weird to see people like ready to just hammer this show, which they all liked in season 1 for kind of subverting or whatever, rechanging the angle on their expectations. Same things kind of starts at season 2, and people were going crazy online. And I don't want this whole podcast to turn into what's wrong with TV critics, but it was really strange to see. And I was like, just be patient. They've got 12 episodes. Like they're not going to tell you everything in episode 3. If you're watching a show and you know everything that's going to happen from episode 3 to episode 12, what are you even doing?
Sure. And maybe I wonder if like the fact that it plays on familiar tropes or plays with familiar tropes like added to some of that feeling. Like people were like, oh, I can totally see how this is going to play out, and not willing to remember they were surprised in season 1. Like you might be surprised again, or maybe they're trying to surprise you in a different way. But yeah, I lost my train of thought.
I wish I could remember who was talking about this earlier. And I overheard this on a podcast. They were talking about the difference between plot and story. And I feel like some of the criticism of the show, and let me just summarize. I think the big thing was there's not enough conflict on a show. It's not like this was one of the criticisms is where there's not enough conflict on a show. Everything's resolving too neatly. But it was like this, we're expecting more structure and rigor from the plot to drive more conflict. And it was really a feint of the show, because what they were doing was not, there's plenty of conflict on the show. It's just internal, and it is between these characters, and really a lot of internal character struggle. And the way they had to show that, it's not going to be plot driven. It's going to be situational. And they were really trying to do. I loved it because it was almost like lattice work. Instead of these big meaty plot arcs, they were doing they were doing the work in a bunch of very smaller arcs that were interlayered. And when you get to the end of it and you start getting some of the callbacks and the payoffs, you're like, see, TV critic dummies, like this show really knew what it was doing. Even in the standalone so-called throwaway episodes, we see that it's working on the characters and what they're going through instead of these large, meaty, Game of Thrones character arcs that we've come to expect from prestige TV.
Are there other shows besides Game of Thrones that we can reference?
Succession, I don't know. That's the other. For me, that's the obvious one where there's this sort of like, here's this empire and all these characters that are brought into it. But I've only seen the first season, so I don't want to criticize.
I don't see as much of the stuff as like Ryan sees as when it comes to what people are saying about the shows. I'm not reading the AV Club every Monday to catch up on the episode or anything like that, which isn't to say it isn't there, but so I just don't really see it. But I do encounter my water cooler bros at work, and they love it, and they love it for. And these are editors and things like that, and so they have comments about structure and character motivation and how you showed that and what the camera did and all the sort of technical stuff you'd expect. But by and large, Ted Lasso for them is an opportunity to kind of turn that part of your brain off because experts are working. It's just fine. And then, there's a lot of reaction to, well, it's getting, season 2 is getting mediocre reviews, or it's getting, people are questioning whether the show still got it or that sort of thing. And these guys are very quick to say, like, don't you just want to turn on the TV for 40 minutes and just have a snack, as Marshall would say, and just enjoy it? But
I did, but now I want to dissect it.
I know. Well, I mean, I want to get into that too. It's not that it avoids that, but I think that the show is completely successful if that's the way you want to digest that show. And I think that if your job is to make $50 writing 2,000 words about Ted Lasso week after week after week, season 2 is a little bit more of a challenge, right? Which is like, hey, we started with something that seemed like a real doggone problem. And then 30 minutes later, Ted Lasso looked at him and said, that's not that big of a deal. And it wasn't. And then that's the end of the episode.
I'm sorry, Mike. Was that a real doggone of a problem?
Absolutely.
I haven't heard that in a while. That was good.
It's true.
I think, Marshall, you're totally
I'm not
right.
Roy Kent on my language here.
Wait. No. She was just saying that Marshall's totally right.
No, I think you're right about.
I want to hear this out.
I'm having a problem with the stream right now.
I'm very
canceling itself out.
I'm very into story versus plot, and I think you're absolutely right. That was a big shift this season. Maybe there was some of that in last season too, but like over and over again, like Roy Kent learned so much. Like Roy Kent is a different person. He's also in many ways the same person, but he's a different person at the end of the series or this season than he was at the beginning. It's just like people are learning or not learning over and making these emotional moves all constantly this season, but it's not, there's not like a ton of sports. There's not a ton of, there's some fun red herring stuff with the banter too. Like there's a little bit of red herring. Like, is it going to be Ted? They set us up to think maybe that with the phones. But anyway, overall, I think you're right that that's probably one of the big differences.
I think Roy is an interesting character to bring up for that because they set this guy up who he's so gruff and he's so mean. And we see in the first season, he has the ability to tap into and say, this is what's messed up about this situation. This is what you're doing. This is how I feel. Like we get it, but it's very coarse, And then one of the things that I think is so awesome about Ted Lasso and probably flabbergasting if you have to write about it, is look at the way they handle the photo shoot with him and Keeley, and then just in general, the way her timeout with Nate was and how Roy's time with the teacher was. This is the kind of conflict that absolutely drives entire movies and totally takes way too long on television. And I am a person who is constantly screaming at the TV, this would not exist if you just said the sentence. If you just said, this happened, and it gets so much worse because you sit on it and they do whatever. And so much entertainment drama is mined out of people not saying the most obvious things to each other. Right. And then Keeley says, hey, Nate kissed me. And he was like, that's okay. She tells Nate that's okay. And then she tells Roy, and Roy says it's okay. And then Nate tells Roy, and Roy says it's all right. Like, they don't make more dust up out of it than they have to. And so there's this thing where it's like, we would just ruin the romantic comedy industry altogether if people just said,
I believe in communism.
This wacky rom-communism, which is, of course, they bring that up early on in the season, and then they just constantly undermine that genre throughout this whole show, right?
They really do.
By having characters just say things to each other.
Sure, but obviously, but then the foil to that is Nate, who is holding all this stuff in, and if he just in that storyline, where if Nate had just said, like, where's my picture? I mean, it's like there's so many things in that don't get resolved, and only because because he waits so long to say anything about it. I think
if the show has a theory, I think you hit on it. It is rom-communism, but it's like all our relationships. It hits this perfectly with Roy, where Ted Lasso says, "Hey, when I finally find the person I want to coach the rest of my life with, I've got to say that to him." All your relationships are rom-coms, and that's what Ted Lasso is really sort of getting at. Is like, you have so much potential with all of these people. And as Mike said, if you were just nice to them, and in some ways it's a fantasy of like all of these people, except a few characters, are really doing the things and saying the things that we would root for them to say. And that's the sort of fantasy element of the show, is like they're doing and saying the things that we want, that we root for people. We root for them to get together in their lives, but it's not just their romantic lives. And I think that's the show's secret weapon, is that all of these relationships are rom-coms, and we're rooting for all of them, and we're even rooting for Nate. It's just going to take Nate a little while.
Well, the main character of the show has an attractive woman who keeps returning to him, and they spend almost zero time on that. When she pops in and she's like, "Oh, I see Ted's here at the bar," that's all you get. So the main character is having sex and is exploring a new relationship. And our television show says, we
sure,
we don't care.
I mean, I think you're right, though. It's about, it's about all these relationships in the same way, like, Keeley wants to move up and become the boss in the way that Nate wants to move up and become the boss. And Keeley is, immediately goes talk to Higgins because he's the only one who's available, but is just happy to be on the list. But, she's going to bring it to Rebecca. And also in the first season, the minute she found out that Rebecca hired, the people to take the pictures of her and Ted, she brought that to Rebecca too and called her out on it. And Rebecca's friend Sassy calls her out on stuff. I mean, all these characters have permission to call each other out, which is so refreshing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the shows that, you said, well, can we compare this to anything but Game of Thrones? One of the things I was thinking of, I am not a fan of The Office, the American version of The Office, because I feel like it took a lot of the tropes that we'd already seen for 15 years on TV. And while the characters were all wacky and, whatever, it just extended all of that stuff out. And it was like, how much can we just absolutely milk this stuff? And the characters, Jim and Pam aren't going to tell each other anything for 6 seasons about their, unrequited love or whatever the hell's going on. And I think I watched 2 seasons of that show and I was like, I'm out. I was like, I've seen this 1,000 times before. It's just tell her or don't. I don't care. and this show blows past all of that and gets into me the more interesting aspects, as you just said, Laura, of these characters who are able, and female friendships on TV. Oh my God.
Right.
That, the Keeley comes at Rebecca like, I'm going to make her my friend. And in fact does. And it's great to see, especially in the second season, but in the first season where they have the conversation where Rebecca shows her the picture of her on the boat. Like that's a remarkable scene. And they've kind of gone back to that kind of like how those two interact, a number of times. But they do. Yeah. They call each other out. Coach Beard and Ted, definitely have that. And Roy at the very final part there is starting to figure out how to be a diamond dog and have those conversations.
But he never shies away from telling anybody how he feels, or started to learn how to do that and give space and all the things throughout. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt bad for him in the finale. He oversteps that. And I understand that Europeans have different vacation practices than Americans. But as soon as he was like, tomorrow, 6 weeks, my wife looked over immediately and was like, that's too long. You don't do 6 weeks in a villa and you don't talk about that ahead of time.
It's like, I got to work. I want to work.
They're moving your stuff out of the office right now, Roy. Not because
all of us, I think, we're making like grimace. All of us married people are making like grimacing faces that you can't see via podcast.
So somebody said online somewhere, and I can't give credit where it's due. And I don't even know what movie they were referencing, but it echoed something for me. It was, I'll see you in 6 months. And Keeley saying, I'll see you in 6 weeks. And I couldn't remember if it was supposed to be before sunrise or there's some romantic comedy where that's it. And they don't get back together. So they were like, oh my God, like it's not going to work out for season 3. And anyway, I don't want to speculate too much, but I think there was something really specific about the very long period of time that Roy was going to be away.
Well, I feel like, I don't want to abandon our things that we have to say about Ted Lasso season 1 and 2, but I was thinking about this going into this podcast. Like, if season 3 opened and like Nate is back with Richmond and he's serving up water bottles and they just didn't deal with it at all, I'd feel like that's almost consistent with the way the show has treated certain things. Not that they would never address it, but I do feel like things happen and you get some kind of quasi resolution. And then when the next episode comes up, like it's just almost a non-issue. It's just a thing that's just been baked into the character. And so I'm wondering, with the questions that we were left with at the end of season 2, how much of that is going to actually materialize in season 3? Because I don't know that Ted Lasso is a show that's going to necessarily deal with everything that it brings up.
And believe me, I've thought about, how it's, diverted expectations, and of like, well, that's in the back of my head now as a thing that is a possibility. But you're right. I have no idea I do want to say today, or yesterday, I guess, West Ham sent Nick Muhammad a jersey with his last name on the back of it. And he said, I don't think it's safe for me to wear this out yet.
That's very wise of him to say that. Yeah. I don't know, guys. I think we could come back to season 3 and that couple could still be in it. That couple could be very happy, or that couple could be broken up. And I don't know what lies ahead.
But to Michael's point, if we come back and they're like, oh yeah, Roy's now, married to the teacher or something, I'd just be like, okay. I guess that's a thing that happened, but I guess I trust the show enough,
right?
That whatever angle they're going to take, even if it's like not the like very fulfilling Roy and Keeley are together forever thing, I'm totally cool with that. Like it knows what it's doing well enough. They're smarter. The Coach Beard show episode told me they're smarter than anything I would have ever come up with, like in a million years. That episode was, talk about way to, shoot your shot. They had 10 episodes. If for the audience, if you don't know this, they had 10 episodes And then Apple came back and said, actually, we have enough money that we want you to do 12 episodes. So that's how you got the Christmas episode and you got the Beard episode.
Yep.
But yeah, the Beard episode was remarkable. It was like its own little Ulysses or something going on.
Well, going back just for a second to sort of like the, what is the critical literati, as Marshall says, what are they to make of this second season? Ted's having problems. He's the comedy core of the show to a large extent, certainly in episode 1, because we're all adopting his jokes. Those things he's the source of a lot of that. And then
pop culture references. Yeah,
absolutely. And the way he quips with Beard, they have their structures that they work with. And in season 2, Ted's distressed, and we get to see that, and we get to see the real strain on trying to be that guy without any kind of reinforcement. And so the result of that is the character of Ted is he's not as fun to be around this year. He's not as quippy. He's not as funny. He's not as successful at being motivating. So all the things that you're able to glom onto with season 1, where you can take bits and parts of that and bring it into your personal life. I personally had to manage an employee at work, and was kind of in the throes of Ted Lasso in that moment. And I put on his voice a little bit. I didn't do an impression of him, but I had a moment where I was like, because I have employees and I have a staff, watching that show, season 1, and seeing, there are leadership skills to be learned from this, and go, that was effective. And it wasn't so outlandish the way he did it. And the results that he got didn't seem so TV fantasy that you would never try it in real life. And so I did. I had to manage a problem at work with an employee. And I took a very Ted Lasso-like empathetic approach to what this employee was going through, and just tried to solve it as quickly as he does it on TV, and then get out of the room. And I got amazing results out of that employee. I could not believe it. I was like, oh my gosh, that actually works, right? And so there are all these things that come from Ted Lasso season 1 that you can do. And I have an employee who leaves my office each day and says, high five tree, and hits the thing, this joke that's made one time in the show. And it feels like the kind of comedies that we have adopted over the years, where they're quasi-quotable, and certainly the character is something that worth remembering. Season 2, you don't really get that, and a lot of that, I think, is partially because the universe of the world of the show is being scattered onto other characters, but also because our main source of that is having a real problem. And so there is to sum up TLDR for 1,000 words I've just said, it's not as funny as the other season. It's not as funny. It's not as inspirational. It doesn't hit the same notes. It continues to be good because they have wisely invested in these characters, and we are interested to know. There is no character on the show, Ted Lasso, that when they cut from one scene to another situation with a different group of people, that I'm like, man, I don't care about these folks. Like, I'm going to go to the bathroom, get back at me in 3 minutes when we come back to the relationship that I care about. They're all equally compelling, and they're all worth getting into. And so it could be that there's just a bit of growing pains of watching the world get beyond Ted Lasso himself on the show called Ted Lasso. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think I laughed as much at season 2 as I did at season 1.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a different show in season 2. It's one, the episodes are all longer because they are having to cover all of these different people who we now know. And it is dealing, with it has ditched the fish out of water. Ted knows how to navigate England. Like he's going to make an occasional comment about it, whatever. But the real point of the show now is what is the trauma of all of the people or whatever, and how are we going to actually navigate what's going on with all of them? And Yeah, I mean, and plus we're also used to what Ted is like. It's not a complete surprise every time he does something. I mean, the high five tree, you know, in the first or second episode where he does that. I mean, now we'd probably crack a smile, but the first time we saw it, we're like, what is wrong with this guy? He's great. And you do get more familiar with those characters. And I think that's how you get into a lot of sitcoms where the sitcoms kind of become about themselves of, you know, you get the catchphrase, you get the bazinga or whatever. And this show is sprinting in the opposite direction from that. Where it's not just going to, you know, very slowly take us through, you know, we got to fill 10 years of this. So we have lots of reruns so everyone can walk away from this a millionaire. They're doing something different in trying to do this narrative. I mean, it very clearly seems like it's blocked out as a 3-act something for all of these characters. I'll be very curious to see if they actually try to push it to a season 4, because I don't really know I don't know what they're going to do in season 3. But it certainly seems like from a kind of narrative arc, they've passed over kind of the dark middle, and now they're heading back to Premier League and on to whatever's going to happen there. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad it's not doing things that like The Office did, or, you know, a million other sitcoms. But I'm also not. Where it does feel much more. I hate to use the word soap opera, but it definitely is getting, you know. It's a show people watch and cry. I mean, flat out.
Sure. And I don't know if my experience was the same as yours, because there were these moments in season 1, like where he has a panic attack out on the street, and like and then it'll flip to something very funny happening. And I felt like that still was happening this season. Although, I mean, I do agree we're getting to know the character a lot better. But it was still very funny and also sad.
Yeah.
But I think this season is, in the first episode, they make a reference to Empire Strikes Back, and they also make a reference to when Danny can't kick the ball, and it's just like, it's a Shakespearean tragedy. And I think they played a lot with that this season. And so I'm sort of like, now we're in, and Ted also talks about being in the dark woods, and that's not where you end the story. The dark woods is the middle. And so I'm like, okay, I think I have a sense of, maybe, I don't know which direction we're going to go in season 3 or how they're going to surprise us, but I have a sense of where we're at in the story.
Well, I have a question for Laura here.
Yeah.
So I heard you needed a place to discuss the Dr. Sharon arc versus the Nate arc.
Yeah.
Which actually kicked off this whole.
And then like,
that we're having
Dr.
here.
Sharon doesn't have an arc.
Does she? I don't know. I want to hear about it, because I don't know.
Well, okay. So let's talk about, you know what? I just need to say something very quickly, or else I'm going to forget, which is that my husband does have a Ted Lasso mustache currently. And he also coaches our daughter's soccer team. Like the elementary school is just like Roy Kent is in the beginning of this season. Although I think he uses the F-bomb like a little bit less. Hopefully. And
wait, Roy uses it less than Eric? Because I like to think that's the case.
Fun. No, I hopefully when he's coaching, there's less. My husband uses less F-bombs. In actual life, I don't. It's probably even. But they are the Fighting Ted Lasso, so that is another impact the show's had on my personal life. Okay, so yes, second season. I mean, I think all these characters, you know, are sort of foils of each other, and there's a lot going on with Nate, clearly. And, you know, I don't know that Sharon is meant to be a foil to Nate, but what I will say is the show has an interesting way to deal with race, in that it doesn't really. Although it does talk a lot about ethnicity. Like, it's very important that somebody's from Montreal versus France, or that Sam is Nigerian. Like he's got there's a lot of nationalism, and that makes sense. It's a very international team, but you know, it's not really touching on some of the race stuff. And so when I was seeing the buzz about the finale and the whole, you know, the Nate situation and going back in the season, and there was all the Twitter buzz about the microaggressions, and are they microaggressions that Nate's experiencing throughout the season? And are we considering the fact that like he is not a white man? Like when you compare him to somebody like Jamie or somebody else who also has a terrible father. We should probably also talk about fathers too. But one of the differences I would say is, you know, Dr. Sharon Fieldstone is boundaried, and she's a counselor of color, and maybe that's another whole discussion about having somebody come and be in service of the show, or and still sort of be in a service position, if that makes sense. But she's incredibly intelligent, and I think the difference between her and Nate, she has a problem with Ted Lasso. It's not the same, you know. Ted didn't give her big break. It's not necessarily on the same line, but you know, the way she handles him is she's not resentful. And you know, when he calls her doc, she'll say doctor, and she'll tell him how she wants to be treated. And when Nate feels put down, or it's a resentment. But again, and maybe he lashes out, but it's not the same. No, I've done the work. The difference is she's, even though she's not perfect, and even though the show is not presented as being perfect, she's clearly done the work. Like a lot of this is just about therapy. Anyway, I should go to therapy. That's the close. But that was sort of what I was seeing is like, you know, okay, what's another character that is not, you know, Sam isn't white, but Sam is the character who has the great father on the show. So that's, you know, that difference. But yeah, I mean, her arc is just opening up to Ted and letting down some of her defenses. On a personal note, I will say in the episode where she gets on her bike and is riding her bike around, I also enjoy riding my bike. And I was like, oh, Dr. Sharon's just like me. Oh, shit. Because then she gets hit by a car. Yeah. And so that personally, I was like, oh, but that's when they start to get close. You know, when he comes into her, there's little details like, I think you can totally enjoy the show just as a comedy. I think a lot of people do. But like, you know, when he first comes into her space, like, it's clear she's been drinking. I'm not going to necessarily make a judgment on how, you know, but there's empty bottles. And it is a moment. Whenever we see Ted's space, it always seems like very organized. And when she comes into his space, when he's having his panic attack, like when they do the wide shot, like you can see how messy his kitchen's become. And like, there's open bottles of booze, and there's things like that I don't want to like pat myself on the back. I do think they take a beat so you can notice it, but I'm not sure that it's like, if you pay attention, you're going to notice some of those things. And so she goes from just being very annoyed by him and also being very good at her job. You know, Nate is a tactician. He's brilliant. And he's like, you wouldn't win without me. And I think he's right. She can say to Ted, as good as, you know, are you good at your job? As good as you are at your job, I am twice as good at mine. And it comes from a place, I guess, of confidence. So it's just it was just interesting.
Yeah, she grows.
I enjoyed dissecting that out for myself.
She grows all the way to the end of the season, the next to the last episode, saying that she's a better therapist now because she picked up a couple of tricks from how she had to deal with Ted. But yeah, that's why I'm like, does she have an arc? She goes from being extraordinarily confident in what she can do.
Sure. But I think when you see her at the bar at the end, and she's so much more open, and not that she wasn't open with other people in her life before then, but like she, you know, no one gets out of the Ted universe without changing for the better.
Yeah. That to me just felt like time, you know, I don't know. I mean,
and you know what, you could be right. Certainly there's some growth there, and she learns a few things and learns that, you know, certainly it's not the same arc that Nate has. That's a given. You know, it's not like a huge, it's a little one.
I do think your point about race, which is not something I focus on too much watching this show, but they set up that whole episode where Nate wants to sit at the front table with his parents for their anniversary. And that felt like they were teeing you up for a little bit of, we don't like brown people in the front window. And that is not how they played that. That's just
right.
not where it went.
And part of me really appreciates that, right? I'm not necessarily saying they should or they shouldn't. I think the writers are smarter than I am, but I noticed that they don't really lean into it, or they aren't, and it's just interesting.
Absolutely. That to me, that's just a testament of them. As we say, if it's tropey, they take it to a certain point, but then they don't do that. The conflict is, for whatever reason, they don't want people to sit up there until he is a little more assertive, right. And then they let him sit there.
Sure. And I think they kind of like, she does make a comment like, he says he knows Roy Kent, and she says, oh, well, is Roy Kent your grandfather or your father or something? And which didn't make any sense. But I mean, maybe if it was father, maybe. But I was like, anyway, she's like, well, if Roy Kent wants a table, please let us know. Like, as if it's for more famous people or more or better look. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was the idea, was you'll see people eating, that you'd want to see. And she didn't give a shit that he was which also seems a little dubious, that she wouldn't care that he was the coach of, AFC Richmond. But
right.
I mean, maybe she doesn't watch football. I mean, but I don't think that it was free of racial context. I just think that she was also not going to, in an American TV show, she would have stopped, put her hands on her hips and said, I'll be damned before I let, someone who's not white sit up there. And I don't think it actually, I think there was definitely some class and other context in there. But I think they handled it to where you could read it definitely that way if you wanted to. Without getting cheesy.
I agree. And I think you're getting at my favorite theme of the show, and I think we probably all have favorite themes of the show. With that, with the foil of, Dr. Sharon and Nate, because like my favorite theme of the show is really how they interrogate competence and what it means to be good at your job, and those two characters, competent. Do we see them succeed solely because of their intellect? And that's contrasted with Ted. And what's peculiar about the show, and to me, it reminds me of the famous Grimes episode of The Simpsons, where this one guy is like, why is this mediocre white guy getting everything? Yeah. What is handed to him? What is up?
His friends called him Grimy, Marshall.
Grimy. I'm sorry. That's grimy to you. But and so I think that and there is a Grimes-like interrogation for those two characters into what's up with Ted Lasso, and is he really good at his job, or is he full of shit? And they come to different conclusions from I guess not the same evidence, but from they're both watching Ted and investigating Ted and figuring out what's up with this. Why are we putting up with this bumpkin coming here and acting like he can really coach when it's clear from Nate's point of view, you don't even know this sport and you're my boss. And this is fucking ridiculous. By the end of the show, he's like, all of the success, the reason you're getting promoted is because of my tactics. And then, but, Dr. Sharon comes to the opposite conclusion. She really does a systematic evaluation of what Ted's up to and realizes that he's really, really good at his job. But it comes down to how you define a job. And that is what I love the show. And the show doesn't just end there. I mean, and this is one of the things I love about the show, is that it makes you ask these questions and it gives you answers to the questions for all the characters. What does it mean to be good at your job? What does it mean for Roy Kent to be a good pundit on TV? And what does it say about that job at large? What does it mean for Keeley to be good at PR? Mm-hmm. What does it mean for Higgins to be good at managing the team? And for Rebecca, what does it mean that I inherited this team? and how can I navigate my identity as someone who's not just trying to destroy something because I'm angry, but really trying to build it and manage it into a top club and put my focus on that. So and then obviously, because you're in sports, all of that is around the team getting better, and how does the team get better, and what does it mean for Jamie to be good at his job? That to me is, and there's 6 other themes. I want to hear what your favorite themes are. That's mine, is I just love the way it deals with the question of competence. Whose competence and how do we define it?
Trent Krem is moving on from the Independent. He's moving on to a different job now.
I think he's going to be the new head of PR for the team.
Man, what does it mean that he lost his keys in the car?
He's stuck there. He can never escape.
Yeah, he's stuck there.
He's going to be hanging out in the car park.
That joke where Ted makes him say, that means you're Trent Krem, Independent. That is like, that is my humor right there.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
But I do want to hear from you guys. Ryan, what was your favorite theme in this show?
That's a tough one. I was never one to in high school to do a particularly great job of being able to tease that out. Now I spend, an hour a day writing a high school paper on a movie I just watched to try and get better at it. Right. But yeah, I mean, it has so many themes, and it is, I think the theme of really the servant leadership really hits home with me, and kind of how it does impact people, which is echoing a lot of what I think of what you're saying. I'm currently taking the PMI, PMP refresher course thing. And one of the things it is, a lot about how are you communicating with people? How are you actually organizing people? How are you getting people to, get across the line? And it's all soft skills stuff, right? I mean, you can do all the hard skills stuff of, I'm going to create a timeline and whatever. But, kind of how Michael was saying, it really is sometimes getting in with the people and figuring out how to actually get them to do their work. And if Ted's got a way to do it, one of the things that's interesting about the show is there really needs to be a published reading list, because clearly the people who are working on the show are going to one of the things one of my bosses did when, this is probably 10, 12 years ago, was he had me read a book about excellence in sport. When I got he promoted me. And I was like, and I turned to my office mate and I was like, I don't know what this is about. And by the time I finished that book, I was like, I totally get what this is about, why he had me go check this book out, about what it means to really, focus on and be in the zone. And I think they're kind of taking that same sort of mentality of what can you do to, if you're not the actual athlete and you're trying to be the best in your sport and what that looks like, then what are you doing to help with the organization? What are you doing to actually help people, give them a hand up? And I mean, that's, the Rebecca arc you talked about. I was shocked as Jamie's going back through season 1 right now, watching an early episode in there of like, man, they really had set her up so you would think she was going to be the Harridan, right? You really thought she was just going to spend her, the next however many years the show was on trying to undermine people and be sneaky and devious, and Higgins would be her wormy little dude doing things at her beck and call. And the way that changed to this season of Sam has asked for something absolutely monumental, and I'm going to protest against our sponsor. I mean, that could financially blow a hole in a team that has just been
relegated.
Relegated. Thank you. I wanted to say decommissioned, and I was like, that's not the word. And her choice there, and doing it in front of a young girl of, I'm a boss ass bitch, or whatever it is that
That's it.
That was it. Yeah. I couldn't remember which order the 3 words were in. But she actually takes that huge move. And as you know, from a plot point, yeah, of course, banter slides in and saves the day for them. But it's she's protecting the team. She's, that this is all before the whole Sam romance thing. It's because she believes in these guys so much, and that the pivot from I'm going to blow a hole in this team is absolutely huge. So that's really kind of like Michael was saying. If you're not following Coach from Friday Night Lights, I guess you can follow Ted Lasso's example as you go into your management stuff.
I'm just going to take a moment and say, speaking of pulling from tropes, the minute I know I'm like religious about Friday Night Lights, but the minute that Ted Lasso puts up the believe sign, I laughed because that's a very Friday Night Lights reference that they used to all hit the sign. And I think it was in the opening. And I was like, are they not going to acknowledge that came from Friday Night Lights? And now I wonder, like, maybe it didn't for them. I don't know. Like, maybe not as many people watch that show.
Well, I think a lot of the success of something like Friday Night Lights, which I confess is a show that I have not watched very much of. It is banned in my home. And
oh, right.
Yeah. My wife grew up the daughter of a Texas high school football coach. And all the things.
Speaking of PTSD, and
oh my gosh, her brother, who grew up in the same household, is like, man, that show is amazing. It's just like what we went through. And my wife watched it and was like, it's awful. It's just like what we went through. My wife is an actor, and so I feel like her empathy skills and taking that stuff deep inside her. Her brother's a lawyer, and so. I don't think that they process those things exactly the same. Suffice to say, the success of a show like that and the imagery behind a show like Friday Night Lights, right, is because there is a universality to the way towns, Texas maybe specifically, but I suspect we don't corner the market. That's part of our myth. But, sure. I'm sure the folks in Alabama sure do like high school football as much as we do. And all those things, all that locker room vibe of like how you find the best parts of sports and the best parts of teamwork, are fairly universal.
And to be fair, they also pull from like Hoosiers and don't necessarily say, and now we're pulling from Hoosiers, but they're like, this field is the exact same size as and then, Nate has to be like, actually the field's not the same size.
Right.
But, there's a lot of times that they do stuff like that and don't necessarily, sometimes they comment on it, like love Rebecca and Sam, or, sometimes they'll make a Cheers joke or something, a Ted Danson, very specific joke, but sometimes they just let it slide. And it's only us Gen Xers who watch too much television to get what they're talking about.
So I think the recurring theme that I see that I respond to, and this is me obviously, but, there is some radical forgiveness happening on this show repeatedly. And there is a part of me that it's one of those things where you almost want to call it an error, a plot hole, because something comes up, somebody gets forgiven for it and they have a moment, and it doesn't continue to lurk in their relationship in ways, And so part of it, like, we're just trained to go like, but did you forget your history? And then part of it is like, no, that's what forgiveness is as being modeled by this show. And so, when you bring up Rebecca and Higgins, he snuck Rupert's girls in. Mm-hmm. She calls him out on that, right? Like, that is like, to me, that of the various, violations that happen on the show, that is one that I would struggle with, right? That kind of deception from someone in your organization doing that kind of thing. And now you are so publicly defined by the fact that you have been divorced from this person who is always still able to have a young lady on his arm, go public, and everyone just puts up with his nonsense. And Higgins was the person who was like facilitating that under your nose. And you don't have a trace of that in the show now. Like, you have to kind of work your gray matter to remember when that mattered on the show. And a lot of that is the growth that they, Rebecca obviously has a lot more things going on. She's not hung up on Rupert the way she was. We know more about Higgins and who he is. He certainly had his time away to go grow a goatee and play his, stand-up bass and all that stuff. And we get the band back together and so forth. So it's not that it just happens. But you do get the impression that a healing was made, a forgiveness was made, and then the show is not concerned with it anymore. And that in and of itself, that absence of that drama, I think underscores the power of forgiveness that we see on this show. Roy gets to yell it, at the end of season 2, did you punch him in the face? No, I forgave him.
Right.
And we sort of see that. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't come without heartbreak. I mean, clearly Ted is not harboring ill will towards his wife for not being able to, process their marriage and maintain that. He is trying to forgive Nate by not calling it out. And Beard says, it doesn't work that way. You can't, I'll call it out. You can, because you're going to do what you're going to do. And I think to a large extent, the show is making the point in season 2, right, that forgiveness or accepting faults or dealing with those issues is not the same as just ignoring them, which is kind of what we get out of Ted in season 1. And that obviously has a very strong emotional toll on him in season 2. That's the window they open for us on him, which is that it is not toll free to live your life like Ted Lasso lives his life in season 1. In fact, he has a physiological reaction to that. Right. And, but that doesn't stop him. He goes through, he deals with Sharon trying to, do the Irish goodbye on him. And then he flips that on her. Love one of those. Love the Irish goodbye. I'm a big fan. And, he flips that on her, but he has an opportunity with Nate's deception to, sweep it under the rug. His support system is saying that's not going to happen that way. He does get to have a moment of conflict. I don't think if by my memory, he doesn't call it out as specifically other than to say, what have I done wrong to you? And it was so weird because I don't know who the Ted Lasso fans out there are on Twitter who are counting the microaggressions against Nate. But when he said that, when he was like, you weren't around and you ignored me, I was like, is that even real?
I don't think it is. Although I agree with you.
I had the same reaction to that. Yeah. I had the same exact reaction. And Jordan assured me, no, there was like, especially when Roy came back, there was some real hurt there.
Sure.
That they called back to.
I mean, here's the thing. There are resentments that I think Nate takes as microaggressions, but like Ted doesn't ignore him. Like, when he gets in trouble with Colin, like Beard takes care of it. And then Ted's standing right there is like, I think I missed something. He's like, yeah, you did. He's like, do I need to do anything? And the whole team is hugging Nate. And, Beard's like, no, it's cool. We got it. And I think, like you said, Ted is very wrapped up in his own, he's having a crisis this season. So maybe that's some of what Nate's picking up, but Ted's not being particularly awful to Nate. Continue. I interrupted you.
Sorry.
Me continue? Oh my
yes.
God. No, I forgive you. It's not a problem.
There you
go. Thank you.
I just as an aside, as I think about the way Ted deals with Nate at the end by attempting to say, no, these are his plays. We're going to rally behind it. We're going to stick with it. The team believes in this tactic. We're going to do this, even though we know, and Ted knows that, Nate is not being a straight shooter in this situation. It reminds me of this thing. Ted, so Ted Lasso, I don't know if you guys know this, but it's super popular. It's the thing that has kind of gotten picked up in progressive Christian circles, the way U2 was maybe when we were teenagers. And then, like very similarly, like Mumford and Sons, like these things that get picked up on, and they're just F-bomby enough to, but they have this moral core to them that it becomes very attractive. And so I have read so many poorly written things that are just about the sort of religious aspects or approaches to Ted Lasso. And that stuff doesn't necessarily resonate with me per se. But when I saw him treating Nate that way at the end, it did remind me of this Bible passage that has always stuck with me, where Paul is saying to the Romans, like, if your enemy needs food or needs water, you take care of them. And in doing so, you heap hot coals on their head, right? Which has a nice vindictive vibe to it, I think, for evangelicals. But that idea of like, that living well is the best revenge kind of thing of like treating others well, and they will have to deal with their own stuff, and you be nice. I see that a bit in Ted Lasso in that last episode. That's the thing that popped in my head when he is dealing with him. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. Christian Twitter is going to be insufferable for weeks, but that's the thing. And then connecting that back to how anytime I have to go visit certain family members' churches for the holidays, I'm guaranteed to watch the U2ification of church bands turn into the Mumford and Sonsifications of church bands, even though I don't like any of that. So,
well, maybe you'll get a Rickroll this year. So
maybe that would be awesome.
Oh, one of the best moments of the show right there.
It was her mom finding out that he wasn't black.
There is race in the show. Really quickly, hope maybe to wrap us up. One of my favorite, I've never gotten over the dart scenes, and one of my favorite themes is curiosity versus judgment in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Just, if you were curious, you might ask me if I've ever played darts before, but just the overall curiosity. And I think that ties into the forgiveness thing too. And I also just appreciate that it's not saccharine. Like when Roy and Jamie are out hugging on the field first, he gets a headbutt. It's like, why did you do that? It's like, so I could do this. And then they can jump up and down and celebrate. And, I appreciate that the therapist, even though she's done her work, says, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Like, there's a lot of moments like that I appreciate aren't like too sweet, too perfect, I guess.
But it's not afraid to go there, right? It's not afraid to be saccharine. It's as was said earlier, it's a show that'll make you cry, and it'll make you cry because beautiful things happen, because friends hug, because Rebecca says, the only piece of advice I have for you is to hire your best friend,
Yeah.
And that stuff. But it's also,
that doesn't read as saccharine to me so much as like, I'm not afraid of saccharine. We should reclaim it.
No, I think it's there. I think that there's definitely a spoonful of sugar in the medicine, but I think it is. There's a fantasy
it's not a
aspect.
Hallmark movie. I'll put it that way.
They really leaned into the fantasy aspect, I think, this season. And it's one of the things that makes the show so pleasurable is that they really are saying the things that you want to hear. You wanted to hear your dad say to you. They really are saying the things you want to see friends say to one another. They really are seeing people succeed in mentor-mentee relationships in all these areas of life. And what Mike said is true. It's modeling this stuff for you. It's like, these are the things we want to hear. These are the things we'd like to be able to say in the moment. And we're learning how to do that with the show without it being didactic. And so I do love the saccharine. I do love that some of this is coming off like, oh, this is just a little higher on the list than a motivational poster, but it's kind of in that spirit. Like, I can see Ted Lasso motivational posters coming down the way from Scholastic. Like, that's going to come, and I'm going to be okay with it because the show deserves that.
I'm good with like the Believe poster level of saccharin. That's not saccharin to me. That's just regular sugar in the biscuit. That's not like frosting on top of the biscuit. It's like exactly what it should be.
So is the difference between what we're seeing on Ted Lasso and a Hallmark movie just three-dimensional characters?
We don't have enough time to answer that question.
I've watched a lot of Hallmark movies. I'm not kidding. I have watched a lot of Hallmark movies. And I mean, there's definitely that, but I mean, there's also genuine conflict in Ted Lasso. And there's stakes for people, whether they're personal or whether we got to get back to Premier League. And so, I mean, I do think it's an excellent question, because I think that's the thing that I was concerned about with the show coming back for a second season was, if they haven't plotted this out for 3 seasons, they're going to, I mean, I've never forgotten the Friday Night Lights second season debacle. Like, the first season is beautiful, and it's should be packaged and played at the Smithsonian. And then you get to the second season. Strike. Yeah. And it's chaos. There's just flames and garbage and
Landry's murdering people.
Yeah. Real Jamie and I brought that up talking, I think, about Ted Lasso, and just started cracking up about the fact that was the direction they decided they needed to go. And that was, my concern was they're going to go, which is, I said, these sitcoms tend to start just kind of becoming about themselves of, people like it when Ted, high fives the tree. So now we've got to have him, high fiving ducks or something. Like, we've got to make that a thing. And that's not the direction the show, it went the opposite direction from that this year. So.
I think Nick Mohammed has said that when they filmed the gala scene in season 1, like it was him and Jason Sudeikis sitting at a table, and Jason talked him through his arc for 3 seasons. So I have hope that there's a plan, if that's accurate information. And
I have heard 3 seasons as well from some source. So I am hoping 3 seasons, and they shut it down. If they want to come back and do movies or whatever, fine. But
I think my indication from Brendan Hunt is that, who plays Coach Beard, was that they got the show and they jumped into it 3 seasons. That's what they have mapped out. They will certainly let Apple pay them more money to see what could happen. But I don't think that they're so resolute at this moment to say, no. It's a totally, it's a locked in 3 seasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Laura, is there anything else you wanted to say on your theme before we?
No, I mean, just no.
Okay. All right. I can tell you guys can't see her face, audience, but she is serious. She is done. She's mad. Oh no.
I'm not mad.
I'm not mad.
No, Laura, don't do that.
So you guys hadn't talked about dads yet. We got to do it before. I mean, we're running long, but
I'm glad we can still get to the dads, because I thought for sure that was going to be one of the themes, and I didn't.
You opened the show by saying you had a complicated relationship with your dad.
So I know. I'm sorry.
I thought that was yours.
Well, but it is so, and I think this is what I love about the show, is that the show is about specifically fathers and sons, but also peeling back from that. I love that even that is paired
and
off
Rebecca.
With, yeah. Well, I love that it's not just about that. It's because there's such a cool aspect of this show that what does it mean to be a successful woman, modeling that for young girls. And you mentioned that earlier, Laura, and that's in here too. And so the show isn't like just saying, hey, it's not taking 2 or 3 arcs and just saying, okay, those are the arcs, because it's trying to get to everything. It's trying to get to so many different ideas, but fathers and sons definitely add it. And I think when I say I love my dad, I had a great relationship with my dad, but he made some grievous mistakes. And I think when we think about the show, yes, there's some one-dimensional villain dads, definitely Jamie's dad, pretty irredeemable. Maybe they redeem him in the 3rd season, but this is some Clockwork Orange shit that Jamie's dad pulls out. But part of what Ted is very real angry at his dad, and you get why. Obviously, he's the coach, and his dad quit. he felt like his dad quit on him. But he starts to learn that the complexity of his dad and the decisions his dad would make, how hard it was for his dad. And he starts to get into that and sort of feel empathy for his dad finally, because he's got plenty of empathy for everyone else. And it really breaks the show open to make you start thinking about all the other relationships and all the other ways that we both fail and succeed as mentors in life or as kids who are people learning at their jobs. In some ways, this goes back to the competence thing. You know, how do we teach people how to be grown-ups, and how do we teach people how to succeed? And their show gives you so many answers for that. We see Sam's dad, who's like the perfect ideal, and we never see him. He's on the phone. That's it. That's all we ever find out.
And Sam's dad is fascinating because, like a lot of the other fathers, Jamie's father specifically, right? We get to hear Sam's dad say, "Son, I am so disappointed in you."
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right? Now, he doesn't live in a perpetual state of disappointment. His disappointment absolutely motivates Sam. Sam knows how to make choices. His disappointments, you know, in fact, he's disappointed with him because it has to do with the sponsorship, and Sam doesn't even know what he's talking about, right?
Right.
But equal time is also given to, "I'm so proud of you. You're doing the thing. You're the guy. Here are jokes." It's the most fully rounded out relationship of the fathers on the show. And again, it's a character we don't even see, but he even gets to be able to express disappointment with an expectation of change or some sort of behavior I need you to take, an integrity I'm not seeing in you. And you realize that, you know, being a good dad is not being a Ted Lasso who's constantly approving all the time. You know, that there's a well-rounded, there's a fully fleshed out character there, which is wild that we don't see it. But every other father on the show is miserable. Yeah, they're horrible.
And
yeah, I mean go ahead, Marshall, please.
I was going to say, I found myself questioning a little bit. Ted is kind of making the same mistake that his dad made, really. I mean, you think about what Ted is from his son's standpoint. Ted went all the way around the world from his son at maybe the most crucial time in his life. And that you can't bridge that gap over an iPad. To me, they don't spend a lot of time on it, but that distance is there and it's real. And season 3 reckons with that a little bit, because I think it's one of the parallels the show has. And one of the things that it has to say about one of the questions it leaves open. Is that enough? Is Ted being a good dad to his own kid? You know, that's one of the questions I have.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, the modeling of masculinity and kind of how you see it between Jamie and his father, and knowing that, you know, eventually Jamie's probably going to have a few kids running around at some point, and the absolute certainty, like, had this particular intervention occurred. I mean, at the very beginning of the season, you know, you have that very, you know, he's promised Sam, Jamie's not coming back. And then Jamie comes back, and you understand from Ted's perspective, Sam deals with it. Of all the things we said, you know, people kind of seem to let roll off their back. That certainly was one of them, that Sam deals with it with so much grace. But but yeah, I mean, there's so much about, I don't want to get to a third hour of the podcast, but there's so much modeling of masculinity and kind of how those things kind of play out with each other, in kind of the father and son relationships across the show.
Certainly another big thing is, and I'm going to make this very succinct, is what are the circumstances that you have and what are the choices you make around them? And a lot of those circumstances are fatherhood and parenting. And then I only brought up Rebecca too, just because her dad, she clearly had a terrible relationship with her father after finding him cheating, and then married somebody who cheated on her, and seems very similar in a lot of ways to
who becomes a father this season.
Yeah. And how she's made a shift now, and how she even deals with Rupert, and, you know, became closer with her mother, and if you show them that he's not getting under your skin, then it's just going to roll down your back, and then that's that. But it also the choices she's making. I mean, I don't know that the Sam choice is the best choice for reasons, but she's making better romantic choices. So
yeah, I will be curious to see if in season 3 if they pick that up again. And I know we talked about this a little bit over Slack. Some of us, I don't know if all 4 of us did, but I remember watching in first season like a few things between Sam and her, and me going, "Are they really going to go there?" And then, sure enough, as soon as the banter thing started, I never followed the red herring because like it's Sam all along. But yeah, it would, I mean, definitely people have had legitimate questions, and it felt a little tone deaf for the show to pursue that.
It's a little messy, but I kind of like that it's messy.
Yeah. And frankly, I agree with you, Laura. Can't say more than that.
The false starts are part of it, part of the subversion and yet the enjoyment, like, right, of the rom-communism, right? It feels right to have some things go wrong when you're trying to, because that's real life, even if Roy and Keeley go off the rails, the show makes it clear that that's not the end of the world for them.
Yeah.
There's no reason for them to break up, though. Like that, the show hasn't given us one.
No, I mean, it certainly tried. I mean, I think I appreciate that they didn't pull out, like they didn't really push the triangle or, but I think we saw that in a lot of ways. I think they're still in the beginning of a relationship, and they're just bumpy, and
I think they tried to do a bit of a pass of Keeley is going to outgrow Roy. Mm-hmm. I think that was in the final episode, and that's why I was kind of like, or he would perceive it that way. That said, they had the whole like the one where they were having issues with space and him like reading and someone talked about one of their funniest gags. That was one of my favorite things, was Jamie talking about how he needed to have space on the field.
Yeah. And
Roy running off. And I laughed so hard I cried at that scene. That was a great bit. But yeah, I don't know. But we should probably wrap it up for the sake of our audience, because we're hitting, I have no idea. We're well over an hour and a half at this point, I assume.
All down to you and how you edit it, my friend.
I don't edit. I don't.
It's too bad, because we really need editors.
If you guys want to start a Patreon to pay for an editor, I'm happy to bring one on. We're going to hire South Coast.
Just ask Marshall to buy you Final Cut Pro along with your Zoom account.
Yeah, that's right. This is Pretty American.
This podcast has been sponsored by Marshall.
Pretty Media. Pretty pop.
But I want to thank you guys so much. This has been a real kick, and you guys, the audience has no idea. We sat there for 5 minutes before we hit record, going, "How is this going to work? Are we going to have things to talk about?" And I had confidence in you people, and you did it right. You had no problem talking about this show, so thank you so much. Any final thoughts? I mean, even if it's nonsense, before we wrap it up and head on out.
I like Ted Lasso. I think it's good. I've been enjoying. I listened to Brett Goldstein, who plays Roy Kent. I listened to his podcast, Films to Be Buried With, which has 160 something episodes. With some members of Ted Lasso pop in periodically. He has a battery of 8 or 10 questions he asks them about films they grew up with.
And I'm furious because it's a brilliant format. I freaking love that format. I wish I thought of it for Signal Watch forever ago.
I find the people, if I don't know who they are, it's fairly hit or miss. He seems to have a bottomless bucket of British comedians who, are fairly interesting to listen to. But when he gets a good one, it's a fun show. So if you need more Roy Kent in your life, you can get the softer, kinder, real version of Brett Goldstein on his podcast.
Yeah, he is nothing like Roy Kent in real life, like at all. It's amazing.
I'm relieved to hear
that. Marshall, do you have any last thoughts on?
I just want to quote, paraphrase another famous rom-com and say that my favorite thing about Ted Lasso is that it makes me want to be a better man. And I think that when talking to people, I've seen that in a lot of people, and it's been really good for me. Just, even what Laura went back to, being able to tell people your boundaries. What before might have ended a relationship for you, or you just stop hanging out. If you just have a discussion about what your boundaries are, that's revelatory for me. And I just learned so much from the show without feeling like I'm learning anything. It's just a joy.
Laura, any final thoughts?
I'm just going to quietly put an army man down in the Zoom, which is great for podcast.
She did it too, people, I guarantee.
Realism and all the things that those have come to mean.
Oh, that's that. So this morning I recorded a podcast on the man who would be king. So I've already had my 90 minutes of talking about imperialism this morning. So anyway, you guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Audience, thanks for hanging in there. If you're hitting this point, if you're enjoying Ted Lasso, if you're hating Ted Lasso, let us know over the Twitters or, in the comments on the SoundCloud or wherever you find us. And we will engage with you on this stuff. I guarantee you that's all Michael thinks about. He lays awake at night going, man, if I could talk to a podcast listener, highlight of the day. So anyway, thanks so much, guys. And we will be back doing something soon. I think next time I talk to most of you guys, we're going to be recording for Christmas episodes. So start thinking of your Christmas movies if you haven't done it yet.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.